The story opens with a young woman introducing herself, a girl by the name of Daisy. Every morning, her very first duty is to sweep the front path until it is spotless. After that, she must carefully water each of the flower beds. These are her daily obligations in her role as a maid serving house weatherwood. Although tending the plants should fall to the gardener, there is no clear division of labor here, so she must do everything herself. One day, a nobleman arrives at the gates of the manor, loudly demanding to see the master of the house. The nobleman bristles at being turned away, while the housekeeper firmly reiterates her position that this estate is absolutely not for sale. Told to leave, the man slams his hand against the iron bars in a fury, shouting that he has not come here today about any sale. He mocks the way the master of the house keeps vanishing out of sight, supposedly afraid of the weather, while the housekeeper calmly replies that the Lord is away, an excuse he has heard 3 times this month already. The Baron points out that only 3 servants ever come and go from this place, and drags up the rumors of a haunted house to needle her further. He laments that a manor once so magnificent has fallen into such ruin, prompting the housekeeper to chide him for his rudeness. Unable to bear her refusal any longer, he grips the gate in a rage. He points toward the portrait inside and bellows that, were his late friend, the previous Viscount, to see the estate fall into ruin like this, he would be furious beyond words. Lowering his voice, the man laments mournfully how swiftly time has passed since his friend fell in the war of sorcery. The housekeeper turns her back and listens in silence as he reminisces about those 4 long, weary years. The man gazes pensively at the portrait, his face full of longing for the dear friend of years gone by. Cutting through the swell of emotion, the head housekeeper clasps her hands and firmly insists that he leave at once. Irritated, he turns instead and snaps at the young maid who has stood silent all this while, ordering her to step closer. As she approaches, he presses her on how long it has been since the Viscount last set foot outside, and the housekeeper calmly confirms that the lord has never once left. The nobleman wonders whether the master's health is so poor that he cannot go out at all, his irritation mingling with frustration at the maid's stubbornness. Shattering that line of thought, she answers flatly that the lord remains in perfectly good health. The man bursts into theatrical sobbing, claiming that his late dear friend entrusted the new Viscount to his care, so he has a duty to ask after the young lord's well-being. He asks one last time whether the Viscount is truly well, and she insists, unwavering, that he is perfectly fine. Feeling humiliated by someone so far beneath him, the Baron flies into a rage and raises his hand to slap her into her place. His brutish arm comes down with savage force, meaning to teach the lowly servant a lesson. Quick as lightning, the maid strikes back and sends him tumbling head over heels onto the ground. The horrifying sight leaves both the housekeeper and the henchman gaping in stunned disbelief. The nobleman's soul all but flees his body as his 2 attendants scramble to help their master, while the housekeeper sharply calls out the maid's name. Breaking into a sweat, the head housekeeper sternly reminds her that a servant must always know how to endure. A large henchman hoists his master up by the arm, threatening that they can deal with anyone standing in their way themselves. The arrogant thug strides over to the girl and sneers that she looks like she knows how to throw a punch. Before he can do a thing, she rains down a flurry of lightning-fast blows that leave him reeling. She declares calmly that she is still being very patient, even as the brutes lie sprawled and beaten all around her. The housekeeper is left speechless by such logic, while the girl casually explains it away by saying her right arm has simply been a little unruly lately. The head housekeeper gently touches the bleeding scratch on the maid's cheek, saying she will punish this recklessness later. Shovel in hand, the girl naively asks whether she should go ahead and clear away the mess on the ground right now. That violent suggestion is instantly rejected by the housekeeper with a disapproving click of her tongue. Yet a moment later, she muses aloud about the prospect of cutting off their heads and mounting them on the gate as a warning. Realizing she has misspoken, the housekeeper fumbles to cover it up, saying they should merely tie the men up in the ordinary fashion. Obeying their superior, the 3 fools are dragged off and dumped unceremoniously outside the grounds. The housekeeper smiles reassuringly that since it was self-defense, the name of House Weatherwood will smooth everything over, while the girl tells herself she is only following the orders of those above her. The maid had genuinely believed that firm assurance. Yet reality proves entirely the opposite, as she finds herself sitting in silence beneath the dim glow of an interrogation lamp. The end result of all that hard work is that the Baron himself has filed suit against her for assault and intimidation. The story breaks off here and cuts back in time to the events of a few days earlier. At a placement agency, she waits patiently in line and is called up by her number for an interview. Seated behind the desk is a bespectacled lady interviewer who, quill in hand, politely offers a greeting. She compliments the girl's striking beauty before inquiring after her name. The applicant states clearly that her name is Daisy Fager, and the interviewer repeats it back to confirm. At the surname Fager, the agent is reminded of the famous hero of the War of Sorcery, but she quickly dismisses the thought, since it is merely a common family name. Reviewing the file, the interviewer skims over the applicant's details, a single younger brother, and a height rarely seen in a woman. She asserts that such a striking figure will be a great advantage for the position the girl is applying for. When asked about her motive for becoming a maid, the young woman answers briefly and very practically, for the money. Accepting that reason, the interviewer moves on to the final decisive question about the kind of working environment she desires. She deliberately describes a place so harsh that no one would bother to spare a thought even if a coworker collapsed. She adds the image of a heartless master who works his staff to the very marrow of their bones. Surprisingly, the girl declares that this sounds like the perfect environment to accomplish her own personal goal. Overjoyed, the interviewer clasps the applicant's hands and congratulates her, for it is rare for anyone to land a job this quickly. She goes on to paint a glowing picture of a grand and bustling estate belonging to one of the most distinguished houses in the empire. Emphasizing what an honor it is to work there, the agent hastily presses a slip of paper bearing the address into the girl's hand. She is carefully instructed to hold out for at least 1 week so that the agency can collect its full commission. Back in the present, the girl stands before the towering gates of the manor. Contrary to the glowing advertisement, she privately judges the place to be so gloomy, it looks like the dreadful lair of some demon. Even the doorbell is broken, overgrown and abandoned beneath a tangle of vines. Unsure what to do, she resolves simply to stand and wait obediently. A full hour passes in silence, broken only by a dry leaf drifting down past the lifeless iron fence. Out of patience, she grips the bars and shakes the gate hard to make some noise. The tactic works at once as the housekeeper steps out to open the gate, offers an apology, and confirms the new employee's identity. The head housekeeper reminds her of the rule that servants are not to use the main gate, but makes an exception this once, on the condition that she never rattle the fence so violently again. She turns to ask whether the new member has brought any luggage, and receives only a curt no in reply. At once, the housekeeper corrects the girl's manner of speaking to make it more proper, and the girl dutifully repeats the words exactly. Leading the way up the stairs, the housekeeper informs her about the master of the house and the manor's meager staff. She also clearly explains that wages are paid on the 1st of each month, with a work schedule running from early morning until late at night. The housekeeper opens a door and presents the private living quarters for the new member. She proudly declares that nowhere else would a servant be given a room this spacious. The girl is told to rest a moment, change her clothes, and then return at once to the main hall on the ground floor to begin work. Before leaving, the housekeeper sternly impresses upon her one supreme rule that must never, under any circumstances, be broken. It is the absolute prohibition against setting foot in the master's bedchamber, along with the instruction that she must always say the Lord is away should anyone come asking. Rather than merely nodding, she is reminded to answer clearly, and she gives her obedient consent. As the door closes, the girl sinks back onto the soft bed, muttering that everything still seems to be within her control. Shutting her eyes, she reminds herself that she must conduct herself very quietly for the entire time she works here. She sets herself the life or death goal of finding certain mysterious items within the next 3 years, or death will close in around her. Back in the present, the sheer volume of work has her lamenting that she really might work herself to death. Hearing the housekeeper praise her remarkable stamina and feeling that the commission she paid was truly worth it, the girl gives a wry smile as she recalls the agent's money-grubbing manner. A look of utter exhaustion is plain on both women's faces after a long stretch of grueling manual labor. Glancing out the window, the housekeeper is surprised to realize that night has already fallen. She decides to set the work aside and invites the maid to have dinner together and recover their energy. A plate of steaming soup is set out, and the girl scoops up a small spoonful to taste. Without the slightest hesitation, she grimaces and bluntly declares that the food tastes dreadful, leaving the woman across from her breaking into a cold sweat. Yet for all her ceaseless complaining, she still polishes off 2 plates clean, forcing the housekeeper to ask her to keep such rude remarks to herself. Watching the new employee, the housekeeper admits that she has seen countless people come and go, but never one as strange as her. In the quiet of the dining room, She curiously asks what circumstance led the girl to take up the trade of a maid. The question stirs vivid, brutal images in the girl's mind of a war blazing with fire and the silhouette of a golden-haired man. She hesitates, spoon in hand, her gaze distant and pensive. Sensing her unease, the housekeeper tactfully comes to the rescue, gently saying that if it is too difficult, the girl need not feel obliged to answer. The housekeeper softly comforts the new maid, saying there is no one in this world who lives without carrying some private story or sorrow hidden deep within. At that, the girl privately reflects that she nearly confessed the real reason she sought the job, that she was homeless and penniless, but she swallows the words for fear of being worked even more mercilessly. Contrary to her hopes for an easy day, the very next morning the head housekeeper hands her one cleaning task after another without a moment's rest. The crushing workload drains her so completely that the young woman has barely lain down to nap after dinner before morning arrives in an instant. The days that follow are no better, as she toils away at every odd chore until she feels like nothing more than a pack animal hauling loads. That night, while the girl is fast asleep, an assassin in a tightly drawn hood slips into her room with a concealed dagger. The moment of danger descends as the razor-sharp blade glints in the dark, leveled straight at its target. The intruder presses the dagger to her throat, coldly waking her and ordering her to obey if she values her life. Beneath the hood, a pair of cold blue eyes is revealed as he plainly declares that from this moment on, she is officially his spy. Her assigned task is to keep a close watch on every move of Viscount Weatherwood and report regularly, but the girl, still half asleep, only blinks and asks why. The assassin breaks into a cold sweat, wondering whether the person before him is simply not yet fully awake. To assert his dominance, he slams his weapon down menacingly along with a threat against her life. But as ill luck would have it, she snatches hold of his cloak collar before he can react at all. The maid calmly rifles through the intruder's belongings, ignoring his pained and pitiful cries. Just as she expected, she quickly finds what she is after, a glowing pill carefully hidden on his person. It is the familiar suicide poison that assassin intelligence rings commonly carry, meant to end one's life painlessly should a mission fail. Stripped of his secret weapon, the assassin is revealed to have light-colored hair as he coughs and chokes, utterly bewildered by this unthinkable turn of the tables. Standing tall before the very man who just tried to take her life, she coldly forces him to confess the reason behind it all. The assassin slumps to the ground, horrified to realize she is no ordinary servant, and stammers out a question about who she is, but she only repeats her demand to know why. Out of options, he sighs and admits that he is merely carrying out an order handed down by the Assassin's Guild, and that he is completely in the dark as to why the Viscount must be watched. When pressed on the identity of the mastermind, the assassin shakes his head in confusion and insists he has no idea either. After a moment's thought, he turns and asks what number she bears, since by internal records she must be at least the third agent planted in this house. She privately notes that her instincts were right after all, for no matter how grueling the work, it could never be so bad as to make every previous member flee all at once. She then bluntly turns the question back on him, demanding to know the whereabouts of those who held the post before her. The assassin protests that he does not know, since his only role was to come and force the victims to swear an oath of submission, with no involvement in anything else. The young woman immediately deduces that whoever is behind this must have used some dark magical instrument to coerce them into a binding oath. Once one's very soul has been pledged as collateral for a forbidden oath, any who break it are utterly destroyed. That means the other maids never fled at all, and very likely lost their lives, leaving her to wonder what the enemy could possibly want from the Viscount to resort to such cruel measures. Knowing he is cornered now that his suicide pill has been taken, the man prostrates himself and begs for his life, swearing he will flee far away and never appear before her again. He even promises to keep her identity a secret, and is ready to swear an oath of submission to her on the spot in exchange for a way to live. Yet the maid coldly waves the tempting offer aside, for she has no need of his loyalty. She looks down at the man sprawled on the floor with a cold, sharp gaze, pondering whether she ought to finish him off right here and now. That violent train of thought is instantly snuffed out by the housekeeper's stern reminder echoing in her ears, forbidding her to ever utter such dreadful things. Back in the present, the light of dawn has begun to break and fill the quiet room. The girl knits her brow and gazes outside, her mind still cluttered with vague calculations. Breakfast unfolds in a peaceful air with birdsong all around, as the two women sip their hot tea together. Mid-meal, the girl suddenly notices a commotion outside and guesses that new neighbors must be moving in. Watching the carriages laden with belongings bustle back and forth, she wonders, for House Asla left not long ago, and yet someone is already moving in. She gives a start, realizing the house across the way was never empty as she had mistakenly assumed. All at once, she springs up to dash outside on the pretext of using the lavatory, forcing the housekeeper to sigh and remind her to use more refined language. The girl strides briskly down the corridor, privately scolding herself for being so careless. Hurrying to a certain room, she quickly throws open the window to look out. She presses her face to the glass, eyes wide as she stares down at the house below. The sight that greets her leaves her so astonished she lets out a gasp. The image of the assassin she had bound up the night before suddenly comes rushing back, leaving her puzzled as to why he would be down there. More striking still is the presence of a man with vivid blue hair, and she worries whether he might sense her gaze even from this great distance. Her instincts tell her that the mysterious man is absolutely no ordinary person. Shortly afterward, that very man comes directly to the manor gate to introduce himself as the new cook and gardener. The two of them silently exchange probing, meaningful glances. That is the moment marking the first meeting between her and the young man named Lu. She sizes up the new employee with a rather cold expression, looking as if she means to turn him away. Feather duster in hand, the housekeeper turns in bafflement when her subordinate presses her about someone. The housekeeper knits her brow and asks whether the girl is talking about herself, but the girl instantly denies it. She points resolutely at the newcomer out in the garden, insisting that he looks extremely suspicious. Seeing the young man chatting cheerfully with the builder, the housekeeper realizes she is referring to Lu. She gently advises her employee not to be so quick to judge another after working together for less than a single day. Even after hearing her superior's explanation, the girl keeps a skeptical look and stubbornly stands by her opinion. Outside, Lu smiles graciously and modestly replies to the builder's teasing that it is hardly fair to compare him to some suspicious character. Looking at the young man's radiant, sunny smile, the maid is so dazzled she has to cover her face, screaming inwardly that such absurd good looks are the single most suspicious thing about him. She has to admit that his strange blue hair only accentuates his harmonious, dazzling features, paired with eyes as golden as sunlight and a languid gaze full of allure. She privately judges that coming face to face with such beauty is nothing short of a powerful psychological shock. Impressed not only by his looks, the housekeeper too is curious about this new male employee's true character. The young man politely introduces himself simply as Lu, and amiably asks how he should address the two women. The housekeeper flushes shyly and fumbles, telling him to just call her head housekeeper, then trails off as if to say more. Lu cheerfully confirms back his post as cook and gardener, which only flusters her further at her own stammering repetition. The young man gives a faint smile and a nod to show he understands completely. Slicking his hair back with great self-admiration, Lu remarks how hard it is to believe that a dazzling beauty like himself must work in such a shabby manor and a garden no better than a rubbish heap. That blunt insult turns both the housekeeper and the maid to stone in shock, for they never imagined he would dare disparage the estate so harshly. Unbothered by their expressions, Lu slowly turns his curious gaze toward the girl standing beside them. The young woman can only keep silent, putting on an expressionless face to deal with him. The atmosphere turns abruptly strange when she coldly answers with a single word, maid, as the name for herself. Lu seems amused by such a curt introduction and smiles, remarking that the name is truly quite unique. He then graciously expresses how he looks forward to working alongside this new colleague named Maid. Watching Lu work out in the yard, she quietly suggests to the housekeeper that they keep a close eye on this new employee for a while. The girl thinks irritably that her superior's vigilance has been completely dimmed by that handsome face, making her far too lenient. Observing Lu's position, she realizes that last night's assassin is right beside him, and more importantly, that he lives in the very house across the way. She quickly turns to warn the housekeeper of the danger of spies targeting the master, but is cut off at once. The housekeeper glares with murderous intent and coldly cuts her subordinate short to set her work attitude straight. She orders the girl to mind her own business and focus first on wiping clean the handprints left on the window glass. Looking at the smudges, the young woman can only sigh in helplessness, for she knows full well both men are spies on the same side, yet has no way to make the housekeeper believe her. She tells herself that if she revealed the truth, she too would fall under suspicion and risk being dismissed, not to mention that the head housekeeper is loyal only to material gain. The truth is that the housekeeper has been entirely won over by the great bargain of Liu, agreeing to work for half the wages and to renovate the garden out of his own pocket, leaving the girl to bitterly realize that the power of money has stood in the way of exposing the villain. Unable to endure it any longer, she resolves to take action and force the young man to confess his true purpose. But Liu, busy gardening, nimbly asks first whether she has something she wants to say. She charges out aggressively, glaring and loudly demanding to know his true identity. Liu calmly repeats the name he gave at first, along with another tease about her chosen title of maid. Irritated by his needling, she leaps a step back with a face full of wariness. She firmly stresses that she is not asking his name, but wishes to know who he truly is. In answer to her anger, Liu smiles meaningfully and teases whether she is hoping to pursue a deeper relationship with him. The young woman frowns in exasperation and flatly rejects the notion, insisting the two of them are nowhere near close enough for that. Out of patience, she bristles and snaps at him to stop putting on an act and honestly confess what he came here to do. Without warning, the young man steps closer and leans down to whisper in her ear in a low, warm voice that he came because he admires her. The sudden confession turns her face crimson, and she yelps in alarm, utterly shocked. At once, the memory returns of Liu watching her bind the assassin and toss him into his house the night before, accompanied by his praise for her bold and impressive handling of the matter. Breaking into a cold sweat, she trembles and wonders whether he came all the way to this manor for revenge after being discovered, but the young man calmly denies it. Annoyed at being toyed with before she can react, Liu spins around and loudly tattles to the housekeeper that she is slacking off and flirting with him. Brazenly framed, the girl stumbles in her fluster and falls into the house, cursing inwardly that the man is not only suspicious, but exceedingly petty. Tucked behind the window, she grinds her teeth in fury and glares outside, unable to believe that such a large man would stoop to a childish game of tattling. The housekeeper suddenly calls out to Daisy, coldly repeating the word slacking she happened to overhear, and warns the girl that she must work hard if she wants a tasty dinner. Hearing that threat, the maid worked herself to exhaustion, yet the dinner that night still tasted as dreadful as garbage. The flashback draws to a close, returning the story to the present and resolving the question of how that wretched lawsuit unfolded. Standing beside the gardener, the head housekeeper gets straight to the point and announces that the Baron has decided to withdraw his suit. Though her mind is still tangled with a dozen worries and questions about Daisy's true background, the housekeeper lets it go, for matters have already spiraled beyond her control. Yet the greatest trouble of all lies in another direction entirely. The blue-haired gardener, cradling a sack of potatoes, smiles and turns to ask her point-blank whether she was the one who killed the Baron. The maid's eyes go round with shock, and before she can react, he keeps teasing, asking where she buried the nobleman's body. Annoyed by his flippancy, she sternly reminds the young man not to speak so recklessly in front of a crowd lest it cause misunderstandings, and proceeds to instruct him on how to behave properly in such a situation. With a sarcastic expression, she begins to act it out, plainly demonstrating humble, gushing, exaggerated words of gratitude for a life saved, to show him what genuine thankfulness looks like. Not the least bit flustered, the young man smiles and steps closer to suggest they rehearse the little scene together, which leaves the girl breaking into a cold sweat and privately certain that this madman is the one who quietly settled the lawsuit. She recalls the intelligence indicating that the ruling authorities had directly issued an order to investigate Daisy's identity, entirely separate from the Baron's dispute. The figure in the shadows has begun to grow suspicious, wondering whether this maid might be one of the rare survivors who escaped the Queen's Island. Amid a tranquil scene, the maid and the gardener sit quietly side by side atop a carriage piled high with straw. Lost in a haze of rambling thoughts, she is suddenly pulled back to reality when Liu calls her name. Cradling a basket of potatoes, the young man smiles meaningfully and gently needles her that he has yet to receive a single proper word of thanks from her. He loudly remarks that even dogs know how to repay kindness, so he hopes she will not behave worse than an animal. After the harsh words slip out, she pauses, fumbling as if to add something to break the awkward air. Then, with a grimace, she heavily forces out the two words, "Thank you." In answer to her brusque manner, the gardener keeps his composure and gives a slight nod, echoing her thanks as a way to mock that stubbornness. His golden eyes flash with mischief as he smirks, and tells her to repay the debt with real action if she truly feels grateful. Paying no mind to that sly suggestion, she immediately turns her face away and bluntly declares she is penniless, to cut off any hope of demands. With that, the maid decisively leaps down from the carriage, leaving her colleague stranded behind to busy herself tidying up the load. Lou suddenly appears close at her back and, in a low and serious tone, warns her never again to repeat such rash, thoughtless acts without being paid for them, and adds that should she ever happen to commit a killing, she is to inform him first. That shady moment is cut short when the head housekeeper abruptly appears, crying out both their names in a panic and anxiously fretting, for she never expected the nobleman to file suit so quickly. But Lou only points cheerfully toward his colleague, who is gesturing fiercely, and reassures her that the girl is perfectly safe and sound. Patting her chest in relief, the housekeeper laments that she had been so sure it was justified self-defense and had tried to use the family's name to smooth things over quietly. Yet the other party proved far too obstinate. Then she narrows her eyes in suspicion, her gaze darting back and forth between her two subordinates as if they are hiding something underhanded. Seeing that dusk has fallen, she sets her curiosity aside and gently asks the gardener cook to have dinner ready on time, and he at once gives a polite bow of consent, before thumping his chest and confidently declaring he will show off his skills with a very special dish to prove his worth, leaving the head housekeeper eagerly looking forward to it. Cradling the heavy basket of potatoes, the young woman grinds her teeth and curses her colleague's cunning, telling herself she must stay sharp lest the housekeeper be charmed once more by his honeyed words. While in the brightly lit kitchen, the tall cook flourishes his knife and board with flair, preparing the meal with professional skill before setting out a steaming bowl of potato soup, calmly explaining that since potatoes were the only ingredient he brought, he had no choice but to make a humble dish. After savoring the first sip of soup, the housekeeper melts with happiness, gushing endlessly that it is the finest dish she has tasted in years, so much so that she feels guilty for paying him such a paltry wage, and seizing the chance, the cook smiles and quips mockingly that were it not for someone peeling potatoes as slowly as a tortoise, this exquisite dinner would have been served long ago. Swallowing her resentment, the maid grinds her teeth and devours a second bowl of soup, bitterly admitting that she really is slow and so has no grounds to argue back, all the while spooning up soup and secretly marveling at how, by some miracle, he could cook such an exquisite flavor, and at the same time wondering what brutal means of torture he used to force the arrogant nobleman to back down. She secretly imagines a more far-fetched scenario, speculating that the gardener's true identity might be that of a royal scion bearing a rank even higher than the baron's, only for him to overhear and slick back his hair in self-admiration, pouring out a lengthy ode to his own flawless perfection, then smirk and advise her to keep that sharp tongue of hers, rather than open her mouth to say foolish things, leaving the girl to puff out her cheeks in indignation as she spoons her soup, swallowing her bitterness and resenting that it is precisely his arrogance that keeps forcing her to break her rule of silence. Under the withering glare leveled his way, the cook nonchalantly pushes his own bowl of soup over to her and teasingly asks whether she is craving his portion. Without standing on ceremony, the girl reaches out and snatches the bowl with a sullen face, justifying to herself that however much she despises the cook, this delicious soup has done nothing to deserve being wasted. Robbed of his portion, the young man cheerfully rises and excuses himself from the table, not forgetting to remind the housekeeper that the matter of his overtime pay will be settled later. Afterward, the head housekeeper smiles in agreement and gently bids him farewell as the new employee closes the dining room door to return to his rest. With only the two women left in the empty room, both the housekeeper and the maid throw themselves into clearing the dishes at a terrifying whirlwind pace. Though she scrapes up every last delicious drop of soup, the young woman still carries an indescribable irritation simmering inside her. That distracted irritation causes her to drop and shatter a dish while washing up, earning a loud scolding from the housekeeper, while she herself glumly concludes that working with someone as detestable as Lou is truly a form of torment. As the quiet of deep night descends, she walks down the dark corridor with a candlestick in hand, carefully piecing together every clue to narrow down the two most plausible theories about the mysterious colleague's true identity. The first theory she poses is that he may well be a cold-blooded assassin planted in the manor by a shadowy organization to gather information and assassinate the viscount who owns the house. The other possibility ties to the intelligence reports that some powerful force has taken a particular interest in her and is relentlessly investigating her true origins. It is entirely possible that this force has leveraged its far-reaching influence to dig up the past she has hidden for years and sent the blue-haired man here to track her down. She gives a faint shudder as she reflects that if the second scenario is the correct answer, the danger would be far greater. Standing in stillness within the mansion steeped in the dark of night, she frets over just how monstrous a tangle of trouble she has fallen into, to be hunted so relentlessly. Cutting through her rambling thoughts, an icy gust of wind sweeps through the wide-open window and snuffs out the flickering candle at the very instant a figure staggers and collapses to the floor. Shattered memories come flooding back like a nightmare, and echoing in her ears is a desperate scream calling out the name Anders amid the chaos. The past rises up vividly with a golden-haired youth, his body covered in wounds, dragging himself away in flight, while behind him comes the iron-hard command to halt from the Supreme Commander. The commander's subordinates rush to subdue the exhausted young man, shouting that he must absolutely obey the orders of their leader. Yet the resolute youth still turns his head with a radiant smile, plainly declaring that he needs no one's permission, for this is a sacrifice of his own choosing. Beneath a sky split by lightning over the dark castle, he gently speaks his final farewell to Raffaello before letting his glorious sword fall to the cold ground. Ignoring the helpless screams of his name, Anders Fager from behind, the brave young warrior hurls himself straight into the deadly vortex of magic conjured by the withered villain. Wearing one last radiant smile, the young man's figure is utterly swallowed by a magical explosion that erupts in blinding light and erases everything. Daisy jolts awake in the empty room, her whole body drenched in sweat, gasping in stunned heaves after the terrible dream she has just endured. In the dark, silent room, she keeps panting, struggling to steady the pounding of her heart driven by the ghosts of her past. Wiping the cold sweat from her brow, she begins to dread, wondering just how much of the truth about her that Gardner has already grasped. A long stream of memory carries her back 14 years, to when the grand dark sorcerer Mephisto, craving immortality, cruelly launched a bloody war. Standing against that ambition was Anders Fager, the hero honored as the King's Sword, bearing the mission of safeguarding the fate of all humankind. And the earth-shaking truth is revealed, that the brave knight named Anders was in fact none other than another guise of the maid, Daisy Fager. No doubt many will wonder how such a strange exchange of gender came to be, and she considers it a perfectly fair question. She recalls with sorrow that the origin of the tragedy traces back to the moment her own younger brother fell on the battlefield, sacrificing himself to defend their homeland island. In the depths of her grief, she resolved to cast an ancient forbidden spell to transform her body into that of a man, borrowing her late brother's name to go on living and fighting for many long years. After enduring countless hardships, she finally succeeded in slaying the ringleader Mephisto, but paid the price with a fatal wound driven clean through her chest. In that very moment, her life ran dry. She felt content, having fully completed her mission to avenge her brother and protect the peace. She had thought death would be her release, yet ironically, she was reborn in her own original female form after 4 years sunk in deep slumber amid the desolate ruins. Along with that strange rebirth came a steep price to pay, for the span of her life now amounted to a mere 3 short years. Sweeping the chaotic past aside, the girl climbs out of bed in irritation, grumbling that these thoughts are ruining her precious sleep. Ever the pragmatist, she tells herself that if lack of sleep makes her late for work tomorrow and gets her thrown out onto the street, it will be entirely a misfortune of her own making. Determined not to let the unease torment her any further, she stands silently before the window and resolves to seek out the gardener and get to the bottom of everything. Beneath the hazy moonlight, she steals out toward the annex, torn between whether to knock politely or kick the door to splinters to vent her anger. While she hesitates, the blue-haired man abruptly opens the door and steps out in a crisp butler's uniform, giving a small start of surprise to find her right on the threshold. Quickly regaining his composed, mischievous expression, he bows and asks whether his sudden appearance startled the little maid. Without waiting for her reply, he calmly descends the steps and casually reveals that his master had foreseen she would come prowling here at this hour, leaving her to frown and wonder about the identity of the one behind it. The young man smiles and says he has been waiting here for some time, while she narrows her eyes on guard, privately mocking, wondering since when the gardener also moonlights as someone else's errand-running butler. Stopping before the girl, he draws out an object and holds it toward her, his voice turning serious as he relays the delivery order from his mysterious master. Flipping open the book in his hand, he smirks brightly and mimics a manner as he relays, word for word, the sardonic instruction that she ought to spend her time practicing peeling potatoes rather than coming here in search of clues. That message reeking of sarcasm freezes the whole space into a silence so thick it is suffocating between the two of them. He shrinks back and cries out in protest that he is merely relaying his master's words verbatim and has not added a single thing of his own. Releasing his collar, she folds her arms and coldly interrogates him as to whether he and that mysterious master are conspiring together to scheme something shady within this manor. Unlike his meekness moments ago, he wipes the corner of his mouth, smirks into a dangerous smile, and challenges her in return that she is the one who shut him up here, while mocking that her memory is as poor as his master noted. She acts on her own judgment and declares that she will never place her trust in someone who looks suspicious from head to toe like him. Surprisingly, the young man trembles and clutches his own arms, laughing bitterly as he admits the logic is sound, yet ruefully protests that he is merely submitting to the stronger party to preserve his own life, as the law of nature demands. Deeply absorbed in her curiosity about the powerful and fearsome master he just mentioned, she suddenly recalls the fact that the entire manor has long been wrapped in a high-grade, invisible, protective magic that blocks all outside gazes. She tells herself that this magnificent magical barrier is the perfect refuge from the eyes and ears of the assassin's organization, so she will stay here for the time being to map out her next plan for her uncertain future. And then that train of thought leads her to a horrifying conclusion about the true identity of the absent Viscount, the owner of magic so transcendent that she cannot even perceive it, powerful enough to strike utter terror into even the most seasoned assassins. She privately reconsiders and realizes her instincts then were not wrong in the slightest. She judges that she has not once taken up a sword since returning to this body, so if she were forced to fight Liu, she would surely be in danger. She wonders about the odds of whether his master is the one who hired the Assassins' Guild. The young man considers it very hard to say, but feels his master does not look like the type who would resort to assassination services. Even so, she remains certain of one thing, that whoever stands behind Liu is keeping a very close eye on House Weatherwood. The young man reasons that since his master knew in advance she would come, she must understand the inner workings better than he does, and she too senses that he is not lying. She privately reasons that for someone who places survival above all else like him, there is no reason to throw up a smokescreen now, and if that is so, then matters will be easier to negotiate. She boldly proposes that the two of them make a pact to share with each other every piece of information they uncover. As he stands there blankly asking why, she immediately raises a threatening fist and sets a standing appointment to exchange information once a week at this very spot. In the end, the gardener obediently shakes hands in compromise for their mutual benefit. Suddenly recalling something, he poses another question to probe for more information. To her surprise, the young man casually asks her in return whether she has any tricks for washing bed linens clean. Back in the present, she reports that she put him under watch yesterday, but gathered nothing of note at all. She privately concludes that she will indeed have to investigate this gardener herself if she hopes to pry out any news. She actively approaches while he is watering the plants and immediately takes his hand, saying she has something to give him. To her surprise, Liu's face lights up with surprise and delight at the sight of the note in his hand. He holds up the letter and arrogantly declines the supposed love confession, claiming he has received quite enough words of affection lately. The girl turns to stone with a face full of revulsion, utterly baffled by what this madman is rambling about. Liu keeps up the act, peels open the note, and calmly says that although he does not believe in love at first sight, he will read it anyway in recognition of her effort. The letter's contents turn out to be a long list of suspicious points proving there is something wrong with Liu's identity, which leaves him frozen in astonishment. Reading the part where she casts herself as the target of surveillance, he mocks her as overly self-absorbed and teases whether she stayed up all night to write this. Through Daisy's warped point of view, the gardener begins to slick back his hair and strike dazzling poses, lavishing praise upon his own exquisite beauty. He goes on to boast of his elegance, his noble dignity, and his vast fortune as well. The maid shoots him an irritated sidelong glare, fuming inwardly that he is the very one who just uttered those nauseating words of self-admiration, and yet dares to turn around and accuse her. Liu tugs his glove back into place and lets out a faint, indifferent sigh, as if he no longer cares the slightest for that line of reasoning. The girl chases irritably after him as she watches her colleague crumple the note without bothering to offer any explanation at all. Out of nowhere, the young man thrusts a small pot of soil into her hands, leaving her bewildered as to what is happening. He instructs her to plant a flower seed of any kind into this pot with her own hands, and absolutely not to use a ready-grown seedling. She frowns in confusion and snaps, asking why on earth she has to do such a silly task. Lu smiles radiantly and casually answers that it is because his background is an extremely earth-shattering secret. He argues that such precious information cannot be given for free, and that planting a single flower is far too cheap a price. If she does not care to plant a flower, the young man suggests she could instead pay 500 gold coins, which leaves her dizzy, for that sum equals a full century of a maid's wages combined. Backed into a corner, the girl has no choice but to shout her agreement to the flower planting deal, not forgetting to loudly remind him to keep his promise. The gardener pats the little girl's head and gently says that he will be greatly looking forward to her results. He half closes his eyes and smiles faintly, curious as to what kind of flower she will grow. The maid glares fixedly at the hand resting atop her head and growls a threat to snap it off. All at once, the head housekeeper appears, pushing up her glasses and sternly reminding both Daisy and Lu that manor rules absolutely forbid romance in the workplace. Lu hastily smiles and protests that it is merely a misunderstanding, but the housekeeper coldly replies that time will tell. She turns to warn Daisy that if she is ever caught neglecting her duties, her wages will be docked, leaving the girl breaking into a cold sweat. The head housekeeper waves the matter aside and orders the maid to hurry off to market to buy food, and the girl obediently complies. Strolling through the bustling market, the girl heaves a long sigh over nearly having her wages unjustly docked, and resolves to set aside the investigation into the gardener's background for now. She reassures herself that, for the moment, he has only reached the level of being suspicious and has not yet done a single thing to harm the manor. As she walks, she happens to notice an old woman selling vegetables, repeatedly bowing her head to beckon passers-by. Looking down at the stall, she sees the radishes and potatoes all withered and sprouting, in a sorry state. The old woman's hardship and pitiful state cannot help but tug at the young woman's heart with sympathy. She decides to crouch down at the stall and gently asks to buy 7 potatoes in support. The old woman's eyes brim with tears of joy that a customer has finally agreed to buy something. Taking the coins, the old woman thanks her profusely and hopes she will return to buy again. The girl gives a polite bow, then takes up the basket and gently departs. On the way back, she tells herself that with Lu's top-tier culinary skill, a few potato sprouts will surely pose him no trouble, but she suddenly notices there is 1 potato too many in the basket. Unsure whether she miscounted or the old woman gave her an extra, she turns back, intending to return it. Just then, she witnesses a burly man bearing down on the old woman's stall, sneering mockingly at the little money she has just earned. The thug snatches the wad of cash from the old woman's hands to collect the so-called guild fee, ignoring her tearful pleas that she is only a small-time vendor. Without a trace of mercy, the brute kicks the old woman square in the face, sending her crumpling to the ground in pain. The arrogant thug bellows, ordering the old woman to pack up her stall and get out of the area at once if she cannot pay her dues, which sets the maid's eyes ablaze with fury. Unable to endure it any longer, she steps forward and coldly cuts in, threatening to throw all these brutes into the rubbish bin. The thug turns to size up her clothing and sneers in contempt to realize the one talking big is merely a lowly maid. He aggressively jabs a finger at her shoulder, threatening to cripple her legs so she can never walk the streets again. The old vegetable seller, tears streaming, frantically tries to stop her and waves for the young woman to flee at once. Ignoring the advice, she delivers a devastating kick straight to the thug's groin, leaving him reeling. That vicious blow sends every onlooker around clutching their faces and crying out in horror. The thug collapses, clutching the spot in agony, and grinds his teeth as he curses her for a mad maid. Before he can finish his words, he takes a full uppercut from the girl that sends blood gushing from his nose. The end of it is the big brute plunging headfirst into the rubbish bin, to the astonishment of the townsfolk. Dusting off her hands now that the ringleader is dealt with, she taunts and crooks a finger to beckon the remaining underlings to come at her. The 2 henchmen, in utter panic, cling to each other and shake their heads vehemently, refusing the invitation of that grim reaper. As they haul off the bin containing their boss and flee for their lives, the young woman tenderly helps the old woman to her feet amid a flood of thanks. Once the victim is calmed, she gently inquires about the origins of the gang that was just running rampant. The old woman sorrowfully recounts that they were originally a self-defense militia from the days of the War of Sorcery. After the war ended, this gang brazenly collected protection money under the guise of keeping order in the market, and any who refused to pay would be harassed and tormented within an inch of their lives. Her gaze turns toward the signboard of the protection racket's establishment, and she gives a slight nod, taking note of the information. She smirks faintly with calculation now that she grasps the whole story. With everything settled, she takes up her basket, turns, and saunters off home. The accounts of the surrounding vendors reveal further that this cold-blooded gang is run by 6 ringleaders, along with some 20 underlings who roam about collecting fees. A passerby laments that reporting to the authorities is entirely hopeless, for they have the whole area under their thumb and are in close collusion with the police force. Back in the present, the girl stands before the door of a tavern, musing sardonically that taverns in her own memories were places for people to gather and enjoy themselves. She cracks her knuckles, indignant that these dregs are masquerading as a merchant's guild to carry out their brutal thuggery. This is, however, a splendid opportunity, for she is in great need of information about the relic and resolves to turn this gang into an effective tool of her own. Beneath the silent night, the maid quietly makes her way down the deserted street. Glancing down at her own stealthy steps, she admits that sneaking out at night is hardly an item on a servant's list of duties. Even so, she shudders at the thought of being berated by the head housekeeper if caught skipping work, and wonders whether it is the night mist that has turned the air so chilling. Pushing the door gently open, she strolls into the dim interior of the tavern. Tapping her finger lightly on the bar, she sharply notes that the gang is 2 members short of her count. Facing the burly bartender, she calmly places an order. The man waves her off dismissively, using the excuse that the tavern is not yet open for business. Suddenly, an underling approaches from behind, narrowing his eyes at the girl, for her figure looks somewhat familiar. He leans in close and asks whether the 2 of them have met somewhere before, while the bartender also nods in agreement that she looks very familiar. Suddenly recognizing the truth, the thug grabs the girl's shoulder and snarls through gritted teeth, realizing this is the mad maid who smashed his brother's faces in that very morning. At that, she calmly compares the appearances of the 2 ruffians, wondering whether the one before her is a brother of that piece of trash, or simply one colossal lump of garbage. At once, the bartender whips out a hunting rifle hidden beneath the counter, chambers around, and levels the muzzle straight at her head to mark his target. Her green eyes flash with a cold, sharp glint, while the gunman smiles slyly, feigning regret for a stunning beauty about to be destroyed. He coldly warns her to sit still unless she wants a hole in the top of her head. Not the least bit shaken, she smiles radiantly, grips the rifle's barrel with her bare hand, and throws his threat back at him. Quick as lightning, she slams the rifle's stock straight into the bartender's face, sending blood spraying from his nose. The underling beside him breaks into a cold sweat, terrified to see a steel rifle barrel bent so easily in the hands of a small girl. Pushed past his limit, the thug curses and lunges in with a fist, meaning to take his revenge. To his shock, she reacts faster, swinging the bent length of the rifle straight into his face and leaving him choking and breathless. The hulking bartender crumples to the floor in pathetic defeat after the blow, dropping the dented, twisted hunting rifle. The maid calmly rolls up her sleeves and smirks, asking who would like to taste the next blow. The 2 remaining underlings tremble and raise their hands in surrender, so frightened they break into whimpering sobs and beg for mercy. She coldly asks just what the origins of these ruffians are. A memory flickers past of a glorious portrait of the knights, where someone once honored that brave young man. Back in the present, she points to herself and plainly declares that she is the hero of years past, leaving the 2 thugs bewildered and uncomprehending. Recalling the days she gambled her life on the battlefield to protect the world alongside her fallen comrade, she berates them irritably, asking how she could possibly stand by and watch such dregs run rampant. She holds up 3 fingers and solemnly declares that she has one extremely important goal she must accomplish within the next 3 years. Recounting the matter of the old vegetable seller, she explains that to survive and accomplish her goal, she must eat healthily, but their extortion of the vendors will lower the quality of the food, and she could end up dying of poisoning. Radiating murderous intent, she growls her conclusion that their extortion is indirectly taking her life, and threatens to ask which of them wishes to descend to the underworld first, throwing the 2 into a panic of screams. A thug with a face smeared in blood from his nose cries out, proclaiming that they are members of the Dead Rats, and warning her not to make an enemy of the organization. He bellows that if she kills them, she will have no way to live, but she only rubs her chin in thought, never having heard of this trashy name before. Her emerald eyes flash with a cold, sharp glint as she squints in doubt at the truth of the threat. Someone steps in and explains that the Dead Rats are an intelligence organization that flourished after the War of Sorcery. He points out that this gang's network operates in secret across all 13 nations of the former Magical Alliance, including the Penrotha Empire. He warns that they are cold-blooded and willing to do anything for information, and that the organization is so shrouded in mystery that even the identity of its leader remains unknown. Back in the tavern, she scoffs that an organization of such scale would never recruit these lowlifes. But the bartender comes to and shouts insistently that they truly are under its protection. To prove it, he trembles as he holds up a gold coin stamped with the guild's emblem and asserts that she is making a grave mistake. Looking at the coin, the young man examines the emblem and nods in confirmation that the other party is not lying. The colleague explains that the intelligence organization extends its tentacles through money and trust, so however shabby this place may be, it is a branch best left untouched. Holding the coin in her hand, the maid smirks with satisfaction, privately thinking that these men having a powerful backer actually works all the more in favor of her plan. She reasons that an underling with an information network would be far more useful than a pack of worthless thugs, just as she once used force to make him submit. The young man proposes using this very group to seize control of the town and gather information safely, creating a double benefit, though he still frets over the risk of being stabbed in the back. At that, she cunningly cut him off, pressing him on what exactly he intends to use that network to search for, which made him start in fright. In the present, radiating the overpowering aura of the two most fearsome puppet masters, she coldly tells the gang what they must do next, and they panic and obediently bow their heads, calling her big sister maid. The young man teasingly remarks in surprise that she rarely speaks at such length, and she casually replies that it is only because she is too lazy to open her mouth. After the gang has been cleaned up, she strides in and opens the door so the underlings can begin their first information-gathering mission under the guise of a new merchant alliance. The young man asks her seriously again whether what she is searching for is the very item she mentioned before. She confirms that her objective is the Eye of Dian Seth, a legendary relic of the Great Healer, rumored to hold the power to raise the dead. He admits he has only heard whispers that the item is hidden in Midwinchie, with no clear lead, but he considers her appearance here a rather strange coincidence. Leaning close to her ear, he lowers his voice and reveals that just a few days ago, his mysterious master also happened to mention this very relic, leaving her shuddering in alarm without understanding why. The scene shifts to open on a new day at the Viscount's manor, with mysteries still waiting to be unraveled. Diligently tilling the soil to plant in the yard, she silently strings together every piece of information and forms a bold supposition about the identities of those around her. She secretly observes the blue-haired young man from afar, wondering why someone as fabulously wealthy as he would stoop to take a gardener and cook's post in such a shabby place. Hearing him politely obey the housekeeper, she grows all the more convinced that this very Weatherwood Manor conceals important clues about the Eye of Dian Seth. Lost in thought, she gives a violent start and drops her shovel when Lou suddenly calls her name, catching her in the act of having stared at his face all this while. The young man smiles meaningfully and flippantly demands a proper word of thanks, leaving her to click her tongue and concede her colleague's formidable sharpness. In front of the housekeeper, the maid points to the pot of soil and reports that she has planted the seed exactly as required. Lou looks bewildered at how she changed the subject so abruptly, and holds out a book titled The 7 Great Mysteries of the Continent, written for children. Her gaze instantly sharpens, fixing intently on the words on the cover, doubting whether this children's book might hold some clue about the relic. Seeing her grim, murderous expression as she snatches the book, both Lou and the housekeeper break into a cold sweat and step back a pace in fear. The housekeeper asks whether Lou did something to displease her, and the young man can only shrug and smile sheepishly, suggesting that perhaps his only crime is being far too handsome, which leaves the girl even more at a loss for words. The housekeeper clears her throat and lifts her chin, politely reminding the maid to stop ogling the gardener's face and focus on her real work. She begins reeling off a long list of enormous cleaning tasks from the front door to the bedchambers, exposing the fact that the girl has accomplished absolutely nothing since morning. Issuing orders in a steely tone, she threatens to cut off dinner entirely if the girl does not get to work at once, leaving both her and Lou shuddering in admiration at the coldness of this formidable woman. Once the housekeeper has left, the gardener smiles and turns to ask whether she has named the newly planted sprout yet. The girl puts on a blank, expressionless face and indifferently retorts, asking why she should bother with such a pointless task. He sighs and asks whether she even knows what kind of plant she just grew, and receives an utterly callous reply that it does not matter in the least. The young man closes his eyes and bemoans, mocking that with such indifference the poor plant will likely wither and die before it ever sprouts. He gently advises that plants too need love to grow, but does not forget to needle her that if she truly does not want to, no one can force her. Back in her room, she stares fixedly at the empty pot of soil, muttering to herself about having to come up with a name. Casting an absent gaze toward the blue sky outside the window, she sinks further into her thoughts in search of a fitting name. A glint of light off a sharp blade gives her a chilling idea, making her unconsciously let out a rather dangerous sound. Gazing pensively at the two black-clad assassins groaning on the floor, she calmly calculates whether to dispose of their bodies first, and then think of a name for the plant. The timeline rewinds a few minutes, to when two men in pitch-black hoods burst straight into the room, arrogantly ordering the maid to obey their command. Before they can even finish their words, the one in front takes a full heaven-shattering punch from the girl that sends his teeth flying. With a supple motion, she follows up with a second blow, swiftly downing the remaining assassin with one forceful swing of her arm. As the two men collapse to the floor, the girl glumly realizes that the cowardly rats of the dead rats have once again sent people to make trouble. Looking at the men sprawled about with swollen faces and foaming at the mouth, she sighs in dismay, for this time they came in a pair. Without a word, she throws the window wide open, grabs one by the collar, and flings him outside without mercy. Hauling the second up by the arm and tossing him down to the floor below as well, she heartlessly calculates that she will dump these two on the gardener next door to exploit for free labor. Stepping into the corridor, she turns to stone upon catching the head housekeeper puffing on a cigarette, having coldly witnessed the whole terrifying scene, who then demands to know just what she is doing. Breaking into a cold sweat, the maid stammers in fright as she faces the icy expression of the most fearsome woman in the manor. When the housekeeper points to the two sacks of battered assassins, she swallows hard and honestly reports that they are spies. Asked whether she single-handedly dealt with all these men, the girl awkwardly drops to her knees on the floor, fumbling, unsure how to explain it reasonably. Pressed on whether she has killed them, she flails her hands in alarm and insists that they are merely unconscious for the time being. The housekeeper exhales a puff of smoke and keeps a mysterious silence that makes the air all the more stifling. The girl privately trembles, judging that such silence is more terrifying than 1,000 words of scolding, while admiring the woman's serene composure, untroubled in the slightest at the sight of assassins inside the house. Stubbing out her half-smoked cigarette, the housekeeper sternly asks the maid to follow her for a moment. Trudging after the housekeeper down the gloomy corridor, the girl frets and worries, unable to settle her nerves. She feels sorry for herself, thinking it cannot be that she is about to be thrown out onto the street just as she was getting used to this work of laundering and sweeping. Stopping abruptly, the head housekeeper calls her subordinate's name in an exceedingly calm tone. Standing before a great door, she unhurriedly offers praise that to her, the girl is an exceedingly special presence, for having lasted in this place more than a week. Wearing a rare, warm smile, the housekeeper expresses her hope that the two of them will continue to work closely together for a long time to come. Turning around, she asks whether the young woman would like to meet the true master of this manor, on the condition that it is entirely of her own free will. Joy bursts in her mind as she realizes with delight that this is the golden chance to be promoted to an official servant and gain an immunity from dismissal, no matter how many spies she beats to a pulp. Seizing the housekeeper's hands, her eyes blaze brightly as she plainly declares that she absolutely must meet the lord at all costs. Reminded to keep her manners polite, the girl obediently and instantly switches to ornate honorifics to express her eagerness to meet the master. Standing before the closed door, the housekeeper requires her to establish a magical oath to keep the Viscount's identity absolutely secret. The maid offers to perform the oath-binding magic herself, which makes the housekeeper's eyes widen in surprise, never imagining that a mere servant would possess such a special ability. Standing in the glowing space, she skillfully spreads her arms and activates a brilliant red magic circle around herself. Her face radiates utter solemnity as she reads aloud the oath to carry the secrets of House Weatherwood to her grave. The instant she finishes her vow, a red magical thread immediately winds tight around her wrist, marking the pact as successfully sealed. Sensing the young woman's proficiency, the housekeeper quietly asks whether this is the first time she has ever performed such a binding ritual. An image of the past flickers by, recalling another life-or-death oath she once forged in her hero's guise alongside the young king, a mark seared so deep it can never fade from her very soul. With a sigh, the tactful housekeeper takes it upon herself to close the subject, admitting that even if she pressed further, the girl surely would not breathe a word of it. Her hand turns the doorknob and she slowly gestures for the new employee to step inside the secret room. The door gradually opens, leading the two women into a hushed and dark space, lit only dimly by a single candle. Beneath the flickering candlelight, the head housekeeper sternly reminds the maid to step forward and show proper reverence. Her jade-fair hand gently touches the gauze curtain and slowly draws it aside to reveal the most important figure of all. The housekeeper clearly introduces him as Viscount Grey Weatherwood, while the young woman holds her breath in stunned silence, taking in the master's appearance. Back in the present, beneath the abundant sunshine of the garden, she props her chin and studies the potted plant, pondering a strange truth. She tells herself that throughout her turbulent life, she has always taken pride in having met and crossed paths with all manner of people in this world. From the comrades she shared life and death with on the battlefield, to the small, helpless souls she once protected, all of them formed bonds utterly unique. And yet, this is truly the first time in her life she must serve a master who is a giant egg. She stares blankly at the enormous egg set neatly upon a velvet cushion, recalling the housekeeper's account that 4 years ago the Viscount personally brought it back and entrusted it to her when it was only the size of a hen's egg, leaving the girl finding it at once endearing and utterly bewildering. The final mystery is revealed, that this egg is the sole legitimate heir to the title and fortune of House Rosabelle, a testament to a noble life awaiting the day it hatches. Daisy silently reflects on the estate that everyone sees as a ruin, and grows pensive at the mention of the name Count Rosabelle. She recalls that the Count was a veteran who once fought shoulder to shoulder beside the Sword Saint, so even though his daughter has passed, he would surely not stand idle if he learned that someone was eyeing his fortune. Back in the present, the maid hesitantly speaks up to ask the head housekeeper standing beside her with the candle. The girl naively asks whether the master is really inside, and the housekeeper calmly replies that he likely is, for one can still feel a heartbeat when touching it. Judging by how the size keeps growing year after year, the housekeeper surmises that this shell seems to function as a protective shield for the life within. The girl's vivid imagination instantly conjures the ridiculous scene of a giant chicken cracking out of the shell and declaring itself Viscount Weatherwood. That absurd train of thought is promptly snuffed out when the head housekeeper loudly calls her name to set her attitude straight. Back at work in the garden, she gazes up at the sky and wonders when the master will awaken, resolving to ask for a lifelong maid's contract when that day comes. Suddenly recalling something, she bends down to look at the young sprout that has just pushed up from the small pot. Seeing the plant has put out tender leaves, she ponders giving it a name, but feels a pang of sorrow and wonders whether she is even worthy to do so, with less than 3 years of life remaining. Just as her mood sinks, the blue-haired colleague suddenly calls out, pulling her from her thoughts. He teasingly urges her to come eat lunch quickly if she does not want everyone to devour her share. An idea suddenly striking her, she cries out, then carries the potted plant into the dining room and confidently boasts to the two of them that she has chosen a name. She plainly calls the young plant Potted Lou, which makes her colleague frown and wonder why the name sounds so familiar. The young man flippantly asks whether she is secretly admitting to being his admirer, but she flatly retorts that she did it so that, should anything happen to her, there would still be someone to take over caring for the plant. The maid smiles tenderly at the potted plant, calls herself its master, and affectionately asks whether it likes its new name. Nuzzling her cheek against the tender leaf, she instructs the plant that she will take good care of it, and that if it is ever thirsty, it should seek out the one bearing the original name. Not the least bit offended at having his name given to a plant, the young man smiles with crinkled eyes and teases that she likes the pot so much she is both hugging and kissing it ardently. That suggestive jest leaves the young woman frozen for a few seconds, eyes wide in utter bewilderment at his backwards logic. She is so furious her whole body trembles as she clutches the potted plant, cursing inwardly that the colleague before her is a madman beyond all cure. The head housekeeper quickly speaks up to break the mood, urging everyone to sit at the table and sternly ordering the gardener to stop teasing his colleague. The girl sullenly carries the potted plant to her seat, steeling herself never to fall for his tricks or get swept up in the rhythm of his teasing. During the meal, the housekeeper calmly assigns her to go out and buy more sewing supplies after lunch, and the girl obediently agrees at once. The cook also seizes the chance to ask her to stop by the market for a few more ingredients to improve these tiresome, all-potato meals. He even adds the needling reason that to have the strength to care for the plant properly, she herself must eat plenty of nourishing food, leaving her to puff out her cheeks and chew listlessly in annoyance. Though she despises that attitude, deep down the girl ruefully admits that the logic he offers is entirely convincing. Stepping out into the bustling streets, the lively sounds stir in her the memory of children innocently playing at being the heroes of wartime. Gazing in wonder at the brilliant banners and flowers strung all along the streets, the maid wonders what holiday it is that has everywhere so festive. Her eye catching on a particular shop, she pushes the door open and steps inside amid warm words of welcome. Holding the local newspaper, her heart skips a beat as she reads the line that Grand Duke Raffaello will be absent from this year's peace festival. The story cuts briefly back to the manor, where the underling next door gleefully scoops up the two assassins that were tossed down to haul off and exploit for labor. Back with the young woman, she reads the news of her old comrade pensively, her gaze laden with countless emotions. Carrying her wicker basket as she walks on, she privately judges that her friend of old still holds the same resolute bearing, just as 4 years before. Blending into the bustling crowd, she lets out a sigh and wonders how his life is faring now. The image of the ruined castle from the past resurfaces, leaving her to fret over how the war finally turned out after she vanished. Following the sorrowful figure of her comrade before her own coffin years ago, she torments herself wondering whether he resented her for defying orders, and if so, when she might ever earn his forgiveness. Sunk in a tangle of unanswered questions, she pauses as she recalls the moment her comrade smiled as he called her by her male guise and likened him to a true blood brother. Gentle memories come flooding back of two young men confiding side by side, where their bond of brotherhood ran so deep they regarded each other as family. Bearing her hidden torment, the maid bows her head in sorrow, telling herself she dares not face him for fear that the truth of her false gender would shatter everything. She fears that the deception would taint and erase every moment they brave death together, so her only recourse is to deliberately turn a blind eye and flee from reality. Cutting through the gloomy reverie, the shopkeeper warmly wraps up her purchases and asks whether she has chosen everything she needs, making the girl give a small start and nod. The kind shopkeeper enthusiastically advises the girl to browse the other shops, since there is a big sale on, prompting her to curiously ask whether it is because of the festival. Stepping out of the shop, she casts her gaze around the bustling streets and hears the townsfolk explain that today marks the anniversary of the Day of Peace. Immersed in the resounding cheers, she silently watches the majestic parade of knights celebrating the historic victory in the War of Sorcery years ago. The vendors around her chatter animatedly, abuzz as they tell one another how this market has been bullied by a pack of thugs for many years. A portly man laughs heartily and goes on that, out of nowhere today, those dregs meekly coughed up all the protection money they had extorted over 4 years, which makes the girl start with a guilty conscience. The people excitedly whisper to one another the rumor of some masked, chivalrous hero who single-handedly stormed the tavern and taught the gang a lesson they would never forget. The townsfolk heap praise upon that mysterious benefactor as the true savior of their lives, which makes the very person eavesdropping nearby smirk faintly with pride. The thrilled crowd clamors to find the benefactor's whereabouts to treat them to a free meal, even demanding a photo for the front page, leaving the girl to flare her nostrils smugly amid an imagined ring of glory. Suddenly passing by the shabby tavern from before, she stares in puzzlement at the sign announcing lunch service and wonders whether the underlings are doing this on their own or by the housekeeper's order. Pushing the door gently open and stepping inside, she nods in acknowledgement that running a busy eatery by day will surely gather far richer streams of intelligence. The moment she enters, the 2 gang underlings, dressed as waiters, obediently bow deeply and respectfully cry out the title of captain, leaving the girl frozen in second-hand embarrassment. The head bartender hurries over to invite the big sister to sit at the counter, smiling ingratiatingly as he reports that the captain housekeeper gave advance notice of the schedule, so he has taken pains to prepare everything properly. Recalling the note secretly stuck on her window the night before, she immediately props her chin and gets straight to the point, asking what important matter they have summoned her for. The former leader respectfully slides a carefully sealed envelope across the table, reporting in a low voice that this is the item the housekeeper instructed must be delivered into her hands personally. Tearing open the seal, her eyes race across the horrifying mission report, with objectives to slaughter all the servants, seize every clue about the Dian-Seth relic, and a warning about the one tailing her. Her emerald eyes flash with resolve, for now she can assert with full certainty that the powerful relic is concealed right inside that gloomy manor. Just as she looks up, she frowns in confusion as she meets the sparkling gaze, like a puppy awaiting a reward, of the muscular man across from her. The burly man puffs up his chest and proudly boasts of his exploits, operating in secret day and night to gather information and round up the assassins, exactly as the housekeeper next door instructed. Helplessly watching the hulking thugs clasp their hands and whine for a word of praise, she breaks into a cold sweat and tells herself that the minds of these remnants seem to have been completely bent out of shape. Unwilling to crush their hopes, she resigns herself to patting their heads with a word of encouragement, while strictly forbidding the cringeworthy title of captain, to which they obediently consent in unison. Lugging the full basket through the iron gate into the manor, she immediately comes face to face with the head housekeeper waiting at the door. Setting the basket brimming with fresh vegetables on the ground, she reports that she has completed the task and receives an acknowledgement of her effort from her superior. Just as she means to turn and carry the goods inside to store them, the girl suddenly halts when the housekeeper loudly calls her back. The head housekeeper looks tense and awkward, hesitating and beating around the bush as she apologizes for the abruptness, leaving the girl squinting in confusion. Mustering all her courage, she whispers and asks whether the little maid has ever thought of disguising herself as a man. That fatal question makes the girl's heart leap out of her chest as she frantically replays her entire glorious past in a man's guise, breaking into a cold sweat until she sighs in relief, realizing the housekeeper knows nothing at all about that earth-shaking secret. Seeing her employee's frozen, statue-like expression, the housekeeper laughs awkwardly and apologizes for her bizarre suggestion. She hastily waves her hands to soothe her, telling the girl to pretend she heard nothing, leaving the maid still panting from the heart-stopping experience. Watching the housekeeper's retreating back as she walks away, the girl quietly pats her chest and reassures herself that her perfect cover has not been cracked in the slightest. Curious despite herself, she dares to ask in return about the reason behind this scheme of disguising as a man, which sets the housekeeper stammering once more. The housekeeper honestly pours out her heart, that she needs someone to stand in for the Viscount and attend a grand banquet of the Council of Nobles. About to snap and demand why a mere servant like her should have to squeeze into such high society, she suddenly lets out an "ah" as she remembers the true nature of the master of the house. Her mind automatically conjures the scene of a giant egg fitted with a ridiculous fake beard, rolling absurdly into the banquet hall. The head housekeeper glumly admits that since the master is just a round, legless egg, he cannot go anywhere. Then she gives a sudden start of alarm at the sound of footsteps clopping closer. The gardener abruptly appears with a dangerous crescent moon smile, gleefully tossing out a flippant remark that he has just happened to catch hold of an earth-shaking secret. Putting on a smug, arms-folded pose to intimidate the two women frozen stiff in fear, he reduces the formidable housekeeper to helplessly stammering his name. Stroking his chin in great satisfaction, he repeats the information that the faceless master has turned out to be an egg, and half in jest, half in earnest, forces them to spill the hidden story entirely. Swallowing hard, the housekeeper laughs stiffly and waves her hands, trying to deny it all and feign innocence, as if she has no idea what the employee is rambling about. In desperation, she fabricates the silly excuse that he must have misheard the master's request for some smooth-boiled egg dish. Not so easily led by the nose, the cook leans in close and counters whether such a dish is a matter of national secrecy, that it must be discussed in secret behind the back of the very man who does the cooking. He raises an eyebrow and corners the housekeeper against the wall, feigning intense curiosity about just how divine the recipe for that egg dish could possibly be. Building his mockery to a crescendo, he jeers that if an ordinary dish must be traded for an oath of life and death, then it must surely be some forbidden art passed down through the ages. The maid shoots her colleague a wary sidelong glare, wondering when this cunning man spotted the oath mark on her wrist. Playing the wounded party, the young man sighs and steps back, pretending not to press her, but immediately pivots to grumble at the unfair favoritism in the housekeeper, telling Daisy everything simply because she was hired a few days earlier. Squeezing out a few false crocodile tears, he tearfully laments how hurt he feels at being left out, when this manor has only 3 workers in total. Flipping his demeanor as quickly as turning a pancake, he breaks into a devilish smile and offers a bold solution to win their trust. The young man steps forward eagerly and declares with conviction that he too will voluntarily bind his life with an absolute oath, along with an extremely tempting offer. Peeling off his glove to reveal a powerful magic mark, he confidently asserts that he will single-handedly handle everything to mold Daisy into a flawless gentleman fit to debut among high society. The housekeeper is utterly astonished to recognize the dreadful forbidden mark on his arm, but the young man only calmly shrugs and explains that it is ironclad proof of his sealed lips, for had he ever spoken out of turn, he would have joined his ancestors long ago. Wearing a deadly smile, the man confidently presses whether that is enough credibility to pry out the secret, or whether they will force him to once again resort to wailing and throwing a fit. Left with no way to deny it, the two reluctantly lead him into the secret room, where the gardener gasps in excitement at the sight of the colossal treasure before his very eyes. Pressing his black-gloved hand against the smooth shell, he showers it with endless praise, marveling at the sturdiness and the lovely curves of the Viscount. Just as the two women are still breaking into a cold sweat over his eccentricity, the madman suddenly swings his hand, charged with killing intent, straight down at the fragile eggshell. That horrifying sight utterly shatters the head housekeeper's composure, leaving her to clutch her head and scream in the depths of despair. Cracks suddenly split open across the giant eggshell, instantly activating a defense system marked by a glowing red eye symbol along with lines of damage warnings. Fragments keep flying off without end as a stream of blinding magic begins to envelop the egg and works to automatically repair the shell. The gardener calmly observes the phenomenon, muttering criticism of its hideous outer design, along with the eye symbol that just appeared when the magic activated. Seeing that symbol, the maid is stunned to realize this is undoubtedly the treasured eye crafted by the very hand of the legendary Dian Seth. The head housekeeper frantically denies it, insisting that this egg is protective magic for the Viscount, and that she has always heard a heartbeat within. Ignoring the housekeeper's agitation, the blue-haired young man smirks confidently and waves his hand to cast magic and verify the truth. A vast and intricate analysis magic circle instantly engulfs the entire room before the astonished eyes of the two women. The housekeeper exclaims in amazement, never having seen an analysis spell so detailed, while he lifts his nose smugly and declares himself a peerless genius. Presenting the results, he explains that this is a protective device of House Weatherwood, designed to unleash a wide-area attack in an emergency, and that the heartbeat is in fact merely the pulse of a danger sensor. Without a shred of restraint, the male employee bluntly announces that the Viscount is truly not inside, leaving even the iron-willed woman shaken and stunned. The maid privately aches for the housekeeper's deflation after so many years of guarding it in vain, and a moment later the woman speaks the male colleague's name in a trembling voice. Surprisingly, the housekeeper instead flushes bright red and lunges forward, eagerly pestering the young man about the secret of his spellcraft with a fervor so great she chatters on endlessly. The young woman claps a hand to her forehead in dismay at the obsession of these magic fanatics, but suddenly realizes there is another matter that troubles her more. Putting on a serious face, she presses her colleague on whether he is acquainted with Dian Seth, for moments ago he had referred to that person in a very familiar tone. Caught by the pointed question, the young man does not answer at once and instead lets out a meaningful question of his own, asking whether she happens to be curious. The atmosphere suddenly grows heavy as their two keen, probing, calculating gazes silently lock together. Based on that reaction, she privately asserts with full certainty that these two are acquainted, even though the healer passed away long before she was ever born. A horrifying truth screams in her mind, proving that this mysterious colleague is a sorcerer who wields the extremely dangerous forbidden art of prolonging one's lifespan. Breaking the silence, the head housekeeper speaks up to change the subject, reminding the young man of his earlier promise to handle everything and turn Daisy into a noble, now that the master's identity has been made clear. Switching at once into self-admiration mode, the male employee shrugs smugly and affirms that he will gladly take care of it with his outstanding talent. The housekeeper nods in agreement that his magical disguise skills will easily fool the world, yet the real trouble lies elsewhere. Both of them turn their gazes in unison, fixing on the maid who stands bewildered in the middle, not understanding a thing. The housekeeper frankly voices her concern and complete unease at letting such a clueless girl venture alone into noble circles. The bold solution put forward is to quickly pair her with a wife to accompany her, so as to better manage and control any situation. The girl privately thinks the idea is fine, but worries since the housekeeper cannot leave the manor, and the housekeeper too confirms she has no time to take on that task as well. Quick as lightning, the gardener places a hand on his chest and nominates himself to take on the honored duty of transforming into the lady of the house. The story abruptly shifts into a grim flashback about a report concerning reaching a limit, and someone who volunteered to take part in the plan to assassinate the villain Mephisto. The scene opens inside a military camp, where Grand Duke Raffaello and a white-haired female subordinate stand tensely over a table of strategic maps. Covered in wounds, the golden-haired man angrily sweeps aside the absurd proposals for a reckless assassination plan. The commander resolutely declares that he will never send his brothers in arms beneath him to die alone. Wearing a faint smile, he calmly analyzes that the odds of success are far too slim, so he would never be foolish enough to throw himself into a wager all but certain to be lost. All at once, the young soldier Anders, his body wrapped in bandages, walks in and cheerfully teases the commander's ragged state after a fierce battle. The youth of those days wears a radiant smile and confidently declares that he is the sole ray of hope who can turn the tide if he sallies forth himself. In a fit of agitation, the captain rushes over and grabs his subordinate by the collar, using his authority as commander to roar a ban on that foolish act. He angrily demands that the young man stay obediently by his side until the day the war truly comes to an end. Yet every effort proves futile as the boy resolutely shakes off his hand and hurls himself straight into the blinding stream of magic, heedless of the desperate cries from behind. Jolting awake from the dream, the Grand Duke breaks into a cold sweat and pants as he hears his subordinate anxiously calling his name. The subordinate solemnly reports an urgent royal directive about the campaign to conquer the north and the intent to push him into the vanguard position. Smirking sardonically at the king's ambition to thrust him to the front lines, he calmly asks whether there is any other news worth noting. The subordinate goes on to report a lead about a woman who survived the desolate island, of an exceptionally tall and distinctive stature. Notably, the letter bearing this information was stained with blood and intercepted twice before it finally reached the organization on the third attempt. Hearing the part about the woman working as a maid in Midwinchie with a face identical to his late comrade's, the commander's eyes immediately fly wide in shock. Shattered images of the sacrifice years ago come flooding back to tear at his heart, making him grit his teeth and clench his fist tight upon the table. The subordinate hastily pushes up his glasses and explains that it is surely just a look-alike, for the entire family of the youth from years past perished in the past. Turning a sorrowful gaze out the rain-streaked window, the commander coldly orders his subordinate to personally and immediately stamp out these baseless rumors. The scene shifts back to the gloomy manor, where the young maid is busily smoothing out the wrinkles on a pristine white mattress. She sighs in weariness as she thinks of the true nature of the treasured eye, secretly wishing it were merely some eccentric master rather than this artifact. Her mind hatches a dark plan to secretly steal this relic for her own ends, no matter how furious the housekeeper might become. In any case, she taps her finger lightly against her chin and breathes a sigh of relief that the precious treasure she has gone to such lengths to seek lies right before her eyes. She ponders pensively whether the other relics handed down through legend also carry destructive offensive power like this egg. Noticing the contradiction between a wide area attack ability and healing magic, she glumly admits that the path to prolonging her lifespan is indeed exceedingly arduous, just as the male colleague pushes the door open and walks in. The young man smiles brightly and asks what she is scheming about, then invites the maid to come out and run some errands with him. Before long, the two of them stop before the most luxurious wooden door in town, and the young man urges her to step inside at once. The doorbell jingles, and the shop girl immediately greets the distinguished guests who have just arrived with a warm smile. In answer to her bewildered expression, the gardener enthusiastically explains that this is the step of preparing attire for a successful debut ball. The young woman breaks into a cold sweat and whispers that she is penniless, but he immediately lifts his nose and thumps his chest, proclaiming himself a wealthy magnate with money to spare. The young man gleefully reports that the head housekeeper gave an instant nod of approval for the outing once she learned he would pay for everything out of his own pocket. Launching into the show, he rattles off a long order of garments, from evening gowns and everyday wear to spring coats, accessories, and even undergarments. Producing his payment card with flair, the male employee coldly pushes the deadline, demanding that this enormous pile of garments be finished within a mere 15 days. The seamstress breaks into a cold sweat and apologizes with clasped hands, for the time frame is far too rushed for an order of such immense workload. Without mincing words, the young man drops a bombshell that these garments are reserved exclusively for the Viscount and Lady Weatherwood, leaving the seamstress utterly stunned. Catching a whiff of money from such a lavish customer, the shop owner immediately rushes out with dollar signs in her eyes, eagerly promising to meet every demand and asking leave to come to the manor itself to take measurements. Pushed forward as a shield, the maid glumly fudges that the lady is busy, so they will have to borrow her own figure, of similar height and skin tone, to serve as a temporary model. Quick as a whirlwind, she drags Lou outside without bothering to say a word. Pulling him close, she whispers through gritted teeth, asking why he claims he will be the lady of the house and yet the garments are tailored to fit her measurements. Smiling radiantly like the sun, he calmly explains that taking her exact form will help the transformation magic work more smoothly, and that he intends to take on her figure as well. Frowning in slight displeasure, she flatly refuses, insisting that a tall, robust male physique like Anders is the most comfortable for her. Seizing the moment, the sly young man presses his face close to hers and flippantly tosses out a suggestive tease, asking what exactly is wrong with his oversized frame that she dislikes. He seizes the chance to bring his handsome, alluring face right up to hers and keep harping on about his excessive size. Visibly disdainful of this madman, she ignores him and lays out her precise requirements for a physique 1.80 meters tall, with firm muscles and a trim waist. Reassessing his own figure, the male employee clicks his tongue and laments that her taste is quite the puzzle for a frame as petite as this. Just then, the shop staff finish the measurements and eagerly ask whether the two of them are ready. The shop owner naively speaks up to confirm the men's clothing for the lady of the house and the women's clothing for the master, leaving even herself bewildered as she wonders whether she misheard. Setting their curiosity aside, the team of seamstresses begins to gush praise that the exquisite figures of the two distinguished guests will look stunning in any outfit at all. The flattery leads into a vision of the maid clad in a soft silk gown that flatters her figure, with a bold, off-the-shoulder design full of allure. Next comes the magical transformation of the gardener in an elegant suit, radiating a dazzling masculine charm that leaves everyone awestruck. The two seamstresses are so moved they shed tears, clasping their hands in admiration before the explosive beauty of this strange pair. Standing side by side, the tall young man and the petite girl form so perfect a picture that the seamstresses, in unison, hail them as a match made in heaven.